Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Steve Isherwood. I'm Chief Executive of the ISE, and welcome to today's webinar. We've got a really great panel that we'll introduce you to very shortly, but this is a really important topic for the ISE. The Black Lives Matter campaign since the death of George Floyd is causing us all to ask an awful lot of questions, and I think we need to do the same within our industry. For a long time now, when we look at our diversity statistics in terms of what employers in particular are working on, the order has been gender, ethnicity, followed by social mobility. But I think when we dig into the real depths of the data, for all that time, effort and money that's been spent, we've not seen enough change. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Just a quick bit of background in terms of how webinars work. We've got a chat function, so if you want to sort of put some chat comments as we go along, we'll be keeping an eye on that. If you've got a more specific question, please use the question box. I will be keeping an eye on the questions box throughout the webinar, and then dropping those into our panelists as we go along. The webinar is recorded. It goes onto our YouTube channel. You will also get a direct link to that recording, so you can revisit the webinar. But also, please feel free to share it amongst colleagues and friends, etc. We made a decision through this crisis to have all our webinars and podcasts available to everybody, not put behind our paywall, because particularly when it comes to a subject like this, I think it's really important that as an industry we are collaborating and sharing as much knowledge, thoughts and ideas as we can do. So that's it. That's enough from me. I'm now going to hand over to Darius, who is going to chair most of the session today and introduce our panelists. Darius, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve. So yeah, great to be with you all. Really excited for this session. A little bit nervous as well, because we've said we're going to be bold and talk about stuff that maybe we don't normally talk about, maybe in a different way. Really excited to be with Femi and James. So maybe just going to ask, maybe Femi, if you want to introduce yourself, and then James, and then I'll kind of share a little bit about where I'm at, and then we'll dive into the conversation. So yeah, Femi.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Femi Bola. My last job was Director of Employability at the University of East London. I've worked in local government, further education, and probably been working in this equality space for the last at least 25 years. So I'm really excited to have some bold conversations with people today. People who know me know that I tell it as it is.
Looking forward to it. And James, can you introduce yourself?
Definitely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Adeleke. I am Chief Executive of Generation Success. We are an award-winning social enterprise working to create a world where your career is not determined by your birth. And we operate under 4 key pillars, one of which is around systematic change, training, mentoring, and recruitment.
Brilliant. And yeah, I'm Darius Norell. Just reflecting back on that period of time, so kind of I started in the kind of graduate recruitment space maybe 20 years ago as an outsider, not knowing anything about it. And I remember then people saying, oh yeah, diversity is important. And it was kind of said sincerely, but it really, you know, it wasn't really that important, I'm going to say, if I'm going to start us off bold. And then gradually over time, it became much more important. And yet the results that we're seeing, as Stephen was alluding to, like, aren't there yet. And so this is an opportunity for us to dive deeper, given the context that we're now in, into what's really going on. What are some of the assumptions we have? What is it that we need to learn, rethink for ourselves to really get deep? You know, I'm spending a lot of my time now working with leadership teams, sometimes working with the topics of diversity and inclusion, and it's clear there's really senior buy-in, like people really get this is important, and yet there's still plenty of work to do to really translate that intent. And we've seen many statements by organizations at board level, CEO level of yeah, we're going to stand with Black communities, and yet what's the reality? So that's our topic for conversation. Encourage you, if you are listening, to use the chat, because it's great for us to get some sense of, you know, there's so many different directions we can go in with this conversation. Want to make sure it's useful, valuable for you. So please do use the chat. You've also got a question function that you can use, which we won't see, but then Stephen can throw those questions in kind of as we go through. So Maybe let's take a little opening kind of position. So let's take maybe just a couple of minutes from each of you, just to get a sense of like what is it that you would like people to hear about your take on things at the moment, and then maybe we'll use that as a platform then to kind of dig deeper into some topics. Open up to either of you. I don't know who'd like to go first on that. Or yeah, Stephen's disappeared. James, let's tap into the experience. What's it like being a young person now, you know, kind of graduating? You're working a lot with young people making that transition, or students. Share some of the reality.
Well, to be honest, this period reminds me of when I started my journey into social action, which was back in 2011 when we had the London riots, which was created when Mark Duggan was shot dead by the police in Tottenham, and it was during a global recession. So, you know, young people took to protest, that turned into riots, and then turned into people saying that this was a lost generation, and that group of young people were facing unsure job opportunities. It reminds me a lot of that period right now, because there was also a lot of noise, and we had anger, protest, and then it feels like there was a wave of hopefully change, but that turned into silence. But right now, I feel we have an opportunity to really create some action, and this is why I'm so glad that we are speaking here today, because the young people, like back in 2011, are feeling really worried about their futures. They're hearing that COVID is a period where they're having the worst job prospects since the Great Depression. And we need to act as employers, as governments, as universities, as key stakeholders in our communities to really provide some hope and opportunities for them.
And specifically, because I want to dive deep, you know, I want, you know, I'm going to name my own kind of discomfort. Like, I don't even like saying the word, oh, how is it for Black people, right? That even kind of raising that as a kind of specific thing, right? But I think we all need to get more comfortable kind of asking the question. So for the Black students and graduates that you're, you know, working with, like what's going on for them that's different from, because all young people are facing that uncertainty, right? So what's the additional experience they're having that we need to know about?
Definitely. I was gonna say it's funny, but it's not funny. So our members, they feel that they have done everything right. The government told them, go to university, get an education, and you will get a job that you're looking for. We have a network of around over 6,000 young people. A lot of them, you know, at our last conference, 40% were on course for a first-class degree. They feel that they've done everything right, but they still face barriers entering the profession, especially when they hear, especially when they hear the statistics on how, you know, Black ethnic minorities are 2.5 times more likely to be unemployed 6 months after university. It's like we've done everything right, but we're not getting the right opportunities. So there is a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of feelings that actually right now their voice has been heard. For years, we've talked about the social and racial inequalities in the UK. And for years, people have said, yeah, we care about that. But actually, right now, it feels like people do really care about this. And the young people feel that this is the right time, and this is a pivotal period, and they want to see some real action.
Thank you. Femi.
Well, Darius, just to reassure you about using the word Black, feel comfortable. We all know we're Black. Our parents have told us. So don't worry about it. Yeah. And I think it's that sensitivity about the use of the word. We know who we are, and we know when the statistics come out, who the government or whoever's measuring is talking about. So I think people do need to become more comfortable with that. For me, having been in this space for quite a long time, I do feel excited, but I'm hoping that employers and universities, or educators, I would say, are going to do something different. Because if we continue to do what we've done and recruit in the ways that we do, we won't get any further. And there are lots of things. So employers over the years have been saying to me, oh, if only the students were better. That's the problem. If only Black students were more polished, or they behaved in particular ways, everything would be fine. And then the universities, on the other hand, say, if only the employers behave differently, if only they recruited differently. So we're kind of at an impasse in this conversation. And it was very interesting looking at the responses from the university to the question on what should happen. The universities, all on the whole, all answered that, you know, if only the employers behave differently. But the universities are the educators. They're preparing graduates for this market. So we all have a responsibility in that. And I'd be really interested to see what universities feel that they could do differently to assist Black students enter the market. I mean, for the last couple of months, I've been working with graduates in what we formerly called the East End, BAME graduates, and I've been looking at that some of them have gone to, you know, excellent universities. The Russell Group, they're still unemployed, and I look at the way they've prepared themselves to enter the job market, and they just don't know the tricks and tips that they need to know. And it's the educators, in a way, who are responsible for making sure they do know those tricks and tips so that they can get into the market. So I think, you know, we need to have some honest conversations about that.
Definitely. And I was just going to say, adding on Femi's one, I've been in meetings with employers where they say, we've done all we can, but we just can't seem to find the Black talent. And I'm like, well, they're out there. They are out there. You just have to look in the right places. You have to look at how you can engage with groups who have relationships with that talent already in place. We understand that you are under pressure as resource leads. We understand that, but more can be done, and you can look at partnerships to help extend your recruitment reach. Sorry, Karen, Darius.
No, it's good, and it really comes to, I think, like a big topic, which is, when we're looking at our own assumptions and beliefs, right? And it's good to challenge ourselves. Like, what are we really thinking? Like, is it that Black people somehow are less able, right? Is that, and I'm going to make a wild leap and say, like, none of us are consciously holding that belief, right? We're not, that's not what we're talking about. So what is the explanation then for why, most organizations are struggling? And I'm going to share a statistic. Some of you on the call might be kind of gray-haired enough to remember the Recruiter's Guide to Courses and Campuses, which I did with Simon Howard 10, 15 years ago. And we were looking at all this data coming out at performance. And I revisited the data, and I came across some stats that we came across, which was the impact of having a 2-1 as a cutoff, which at that time was very prevalent. I know it's going to change since then. This is shocking to say now. So 2/3 of Black students were excluded by that cutoff at university. So before any conversation starts, it's like, basically 2/3 of Black students, sorry, you can't come and work for us, compared to 1/3 of white students. Right now, in some ways, it's kind of weird. I would say it's even worse, because with the degree inflation, we've got now if you have a 2-1 cutoff, 19% of white students are excluded. But basically, if you're white, it's okay, you're in. 43% of Black students excluded, right? So if the only way I can get to work for you is by having a 2-1 or better, this is having we're getting close to calling that a discriminatory policy now. And so that's we've got to get beyond like how we define talent. Like, if that's the only measure we're using, like, I have to meet that bar, then the impact on the pool of people I'm recruiting is not necessarily going to be massively skewed in terms of ethnic background.
Darius, I think that's a really relevant point, and it is about how you do track and attract talent. And years ago, I worked on a project with mostly, there were really kind of naughty boys from the Isle of Dogs, and a group of corporates had decided that they really wanted to recruit from somewhere different. And I think if you're going to do that, we have to talk about risk. So they decided that they would take this risk. And I think that whenever you look at risk, you have to think about how risky are things anyway. And so they decided that they were going to recruit into IT help desks from certain schools on the Isle of Dogs, which basically had a working class population. And it wasn't just to do with BAME, it was to do with class. And they said they'd only recruit people who had 3 GCSEs or less. And I think at the time that was a massive risk. You know, we're only going to take people with 3 GCSEs or less. And the way we're going to decide who we take, we're going to decide a new test, because we can't use GCSEs, because we've already said we're only having people with 3 GCSEs or less. So they went to SL, the testing company, and said, can you come up with a test that looks for aptitude for IT? We're not going to look at whether people have got maths or English, because there were a couple of young men on the program who had no GCSEs at all.
Yeah.
And we went on and we designed a program around an aptitude test, and one of the part of the test was dexterity. So how quickly could you put a Lego model together? And so when you want to get people are different, you have to come up with different ways of doing things. Now that program was really successful and went national. The sponsor, one of the sponsors was Deloitte. It went national, and we worked with FE colleges to look for people who had 3 GCSEs or less. And also people kept saying, oh, they must have had more than 3 GCSEs, and they didn't. The Merry twins, who were destined for a life of crime, according to their teachers, who knew them from their activities on the Isle of Dogs at the weekends, one of them is a manager at HSBC now. So if you want to do things differently, if you're prepared to take that risk, you can come up with a different outcome. It just costs money, because that wasn't a cheap program. And when you think of how much money employers spend on recruiting people who are just like the last lot of people they recruited, I think it's a risk that people can take. And I think it takes some creativity and innovation and some energy, because you've really got to want to do it. And right. I think that that's the things that you need to combine for me. You need to want to do something different. You need to explore what that might be with experts in the field. And that doesn't necessarily have to be with people who look like you. And and it's going to cost you a bit of money.
Definitely.
Nice.
And Darius, sorry, I was just going to like to add to that. I'm going to add 2 stats. So you started off by talking about people's beliefs around Black talent and how, you know, you're sure that no one has those beliefs. But actually, the fact is people do, whether that is consciously or unconsciously. You know, we know that if you have a white sounding name, you have a 50% greater chance of getting a call back on application than if you're someone with a Black name. So that's one stat. The second stat is this is from Cantor, who've done Cantor's European award-winning inclusion index, where they did a survey of 40,000 people in 12 different countries. But in the UK, they found that 50% more Black ethnic minority professionals thought that most employees would not challenge others' inappropriate behaviors in the office. Now, the reason I'm adding that second stat is if people know that there are people who are in charge of recruitment or hiring talent who have these beliefs, whether that is out in public or hidden, but they know about it, they're not challenging those bad behaviors. They're not challenging those learned beliefs, which means that our incredibly talented Black talent are being stopped from entering organizations. The second part to what you asked us was around recruitment practices and definition of what talent is. And I totally agree with you. Companies need to look at their definition of what talent is and start to move away from the traditional definition of talent, grades, how many countries you've been to, but start to provide more weighting on experiences that people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds would have, such as working in a shop, such as, like all those different things that makes that candidate who they are, especially if you're talking to the future workforce about being themselves. We need to encourage that and actually mark that in the recruitment practices. And the other part of that is we need to look at how we can level the playing field in recruitment. So we all know, and I've seen from the answers that we know that a lot of employers are spending a lot of their time at the Russell Group. Russell Group are fantastic institutions, but the diversity levels is not the same as some other institutions. So when applicants are applying to you, employers, we need to do more to make sure that actually we're giving them the same information so that when it comes to interview, we're not really marketing them on the knowledge of the organization, but we're looking at their potential. Organizations have done a great deal at doing blind recruitment and all that type of stuff and trying to put more weighting on what do you know about us as an organization. Well, if you're educating the guys at Oxford and Cambridge more about your company, you're educating them how to pass that recruitment phase. And it means that those black candidates that you don't have access to are being disproportionately disadvantaged in these new fair recruitment practices.
Great.
I'll just jump in there, because we've got quite a few questions coming through, and a few of them are on this theme of what can employers do differently, what they need to do, to be looking at potential rather than just achievement. And one of the early sort of questions was saying that, is there a basic problem with employers that basically what they want are posh black students, and they're not interested in anything else, and that by its nature excludes a lot of people. Is that true? Is that something you think employers are guilty of?
Let me jump in first. I don't think that is fair. I don't from the conversation, I don't think that's what employers are looking for. I think that's what they get. Right. So, and that's where the bias comes in, is kind of what does a good candidate look like, right? And currently, and this is why bias shows up in lots of subtle ways, right? I mean, James, you're talking about bias in terms of people's names, absolutely. One of the ways that bias can show up is like a good candidate has a 2-1 or better, right? And as I'm biased, I think there's lots of research to show that's not a great way to be measuring someone's talent and capability and ability to contribute. So inadvertently, I think employers do a lot to make it difficult and stop themselves hiring a much wider range of talent, which includes black students and the people that are really going to be able to contribute to their organization. So I think it's that would be my response. But I'd love to, Femi, you were going to say something. Sorry, I was going to.
No worries. I was going to say that if you look at the way organizations kind of recruit, they use, in a way, bulk systems that can be managed by people who can be, in a way, quite junior in the organization, so that they can just set up what they do every year, really. So we have some online assessment tests, followed by a group exercise, followed by interviews. So that whole process is clear and can be managed very easily. And can also manage quite a lot of people quite easily. And I think that it's breaking away. If you want to get, as I said earlier, if you want to get different people, you've got to break away from that way of looking for talent. And also that method favours people who've gone to Russell Group institutions, also who come from particular backgrounds where people can help them. I mean, if you're, your parents are not professionals, they're not going to be able to help you prepare for those particular tests or have an understanding or know somebody. If they don't know they can't do it, they'll know somebody who does. And I think it's that kind of thing. If you want to make things fairer and attract different people, you've got to break out of the kind of systems that you're very accustomed and very comfortable using. And, as you said, 2-1 or above is a really easy. It's not even costly. You just write on a piece of paper. That's who we want. So you already made life so much more easy for yourself. And I think you've got to be, if you're going to recruit people who are different, your organisation, your culture has to be able to welcome those people and foster those kind of people, because they're not going to sound like you. They're not going to have done the same things that they haven't been to the door in the summer and pitched their tent. with the rest of the people in France. They haven't had a nice conversation over the Daily Mail on the ferry crossing over. They haven't done those things. They haven't been skiing, and they're not going to have a skiing conversation for to talk about. And if I take my son as an example, at his organisation, he quickly discovered he didn't know a lot about golf. And apparently this is something he needed to know about. And so if you've got that system and those expectations, it's only people from BAME communities, which is why you end up with those post brown people, because they've been exposed to that, because they come from the growing BAME middle class in this country. And so they can fare better in that situation. So we've really got to think completely differently. We've really got to challenge ourselves on, as you say, what does a good graduate look like? What does a good graduate sound like? What should a good graduate have done in order to fit into our culture and organisation?
Thanks for me.
So can I just, sorry, just a question, another question that's coming here around that BAME issue, and it's a comment saying that actually what too many people are focusing on, or they look at their statistics and they say, oh, we're fine, but actually they're fine on the AIM bit. What that masks is the fact they're not very good on the B bit, the black bits. Do you think that that's true, particularly when it comes to, I guess, that sort of poshness middle class bit?
I think it can be, because even if you look at organisations, when they look at their senior management, they'll say, oh, they'll have maybe out of 20 staff, they'll have one BAME person, or out of 10 staff, they'll have one BAME person, and it looks like a big part of the statistic when it's just one person. And I think that in terms of being posh, you can have some Indian graduates of Indian heritage who often tend to make up more of the BAME middle class. You can have 5 or 6 of them, and then you look fantastic. And there isn't any black people, people who are Afro-Caribbean or black African in your organisation. And I think that delving down into the statistics and looking at who is on our workforce, because I've walked into offices and there will be brown people there, but not one of them will be a black man. So many organizations, you will not see a black man amongst them. And I said to my son, look, you don't have to do very much. You're a black man, you're really absent. If you can find a chair to sit on, you'll do really well in an organisation, because there probably won't be anybody else sitting on a chair like you.
Definitely. And I'd like to add to that in terms of your question. This period, we started off talking about George Floyd and this period. And this period and this conversation is asking employers around authentic leadership. And for far too long, employers have utilized stats to say we don't have a BAME issue, like you have said. And we know of instances where employers will say, we've got this percentage of BAME staff, and you find out actually they've included the guys who didn't include the ethnicity, or they'll be like UK wide, they use the stats for the UK wide, but you find out actually their main office is in London. And if you look at the demographic of London compared to the demographic of staff, they aren't doing that well in terms of the diversity statistics. And when we talk about authentic leadership, it's time that we need to be honest. If you are truly passionate about change, you have to understand that you may face criticism. Like trying to do the right thing is not easy. And for a lot of organizations, they are very risk adverse. So, they try to do what's easy and to say, this is our stats. But actually, let's be honest. And when the organizations which we work with, I found that they are really passionate about change. Like you said, Darius, let's not be too hard on employers. Employers are really passionate about making change happen. But we need to ask more. We need to be courageous during this period where we have the air of leadership. Whereas before we used to have to use statistics to justify doing something differently. Now the employee base, your customer base are asking you to do stuff differently. This is, if you are a change agent within your resourcing team, this is your opportunity to put something together and actually truly start to move the dial.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely. So I think it's a lovely point, because it links into, there is a lot of effort that employers and money that employers have been spending, right? So and I think the recognition is, okay, that's not enough, right? And doing a few more years of it isn't going to change the results, right? So for all of us, it's kind of, okay, what is the thing that needs to be done differently? And I think, we can talk to the senior leaders in our organizations in a different way, because they've stood up and said, look, this is important now. We want to, we're with you. We want to do something different. And so there's an opportunity to say, okay, here's what we could do different. And to come back to Femi's point, that ability to take a risk is so critical, because one of the things that reinforces where we are is that we only get, we get to hire a bunch of people and go, well, look, they're great, so we need to carry on doing that. We never get to find out the results of the people that we didn't hire. Would they have been just as good? Like, my kind of cheeky challenge is, like, let's get a bunch of people in the room. You tell me who the best ones are, and let me put a team together for the ones that you reject. And I think I can outperform the ones that you hired, right? And so how do we find out what real talent is? Because it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? We think it's this, we get those people, and some of them do well, maybe many of them do well. And so for example, I mean, I'm just pushing stuff out there, but imagine our internship programs, which at one time were a kind of way for people to find a way into an industry and kind of learn more about it, have now morphed into basically getting a pre-job, with the number of people that are getting hired straight off the back of them. Like, what if we said, okay, to your 3 GCSE example, like, what if we make our intern program only available to people that we wouldn't normally hire, right? We still think they're good somehow, but they don't meet our normal minimum criteria. Let's use it as a way to research and understand what else we could be looking for and looking at to find out what makes great talent. Understanding we're going to be hiring less of them at the end of this intern program because this is a non-traditional group. So that would be a way of taking a risk that maybe there's more permission to and more space to, in service of a bigger goal of getting into talent. So I wanted to just offer that out.
I think that's really interesting, Darius, because when I look back on the work that I've done with employers, it's been where we've taken that kind of risk and done things differently. And some of if I look at, for example, the Taylor Bennett Foundation that was set up to challenge the lack of diversity in the communications industry, that charity has been going for about 11 years now. And what happened there was we set up a program for graduates, an internship program. But the interesting thing about it at the time, 10 years ago, was most internships in the communication industry required you to work for nothing for a couple of months. And for so many people, that was discriminatory in terms of entry. And so one of the things I challenged the employers at the time was, if you're going to have an internship to attract people who are different, you need to pay people for that training period. And you need to think about what they need to know in order to enter the industry, and how can we kind of make that happen. And so it was a 10-week internship program. It was paid and is still paid, and you get your travel paid as well. And that way they've had over 100 graduates over the years, and quite over 60%, in fact even more than 70% of them are still working in the industry. And also a number of them, and I can send out people the report, actually have management roles in the communication industry now. But it took, first of all, at the time, you didn't need a 2-1 to get on the program. You wrote a statement about why you wanted to be on the program. There was a little aptitude test to get on the program, but it wasn't that you had to have a 2-1, and you had to have come from a particular university. And it's been quite effective. So I do think that people you can do things differently. And the other thing is, if you're, I think your idea of having a group of interns who people probably wouldn't have hired is that employers don't have to take that risk on their own. A group of employers could get together and say, right, let's share this risk. And I don't even think it's a risk at all, because if I look at myself, when I was first taken on to manage employability, I think at the time I was the first Black head of careers probably in the UK at the time. So my university could have said, we're taking a massive risk, whereas I didn't feel like that. I thought they were getting the best person for the job and somebody incredibly smart, So, it depends on how you see risk. And I think a group of employers coming together at this particular pivotal point in time and say, yes, we are prepared to do something different. We're not sure exactly how it is, but then there are plenty of experts in the field that can tell them, this is the way you can recruit, this is the way you can look for aptitude, this is the way you can, look for talent. This is a moment that, as I say, a group of employers could come together and say, yes, let's do this, because we've had lots and lots of talk. Why don't we just do something? Because a lot of the time when you want change, you just have to do something. You don't know where it's going to take you. You don't know what's going to happen. But I think at this point in time, not doing anything, inactivity is not an option.
Definitely, I totally agree with you, especially in 2020, things move so fast. So there is an opportunity to reimagine how you do things, and there's different levels of risk. So you can do it at an organizational level, but then also think about how you can utilize what you're currently doing to feed into your talent pipeline. So, you have loads of staff in the community working on mentoring programs. So we work with a lot of organizations on, supporting our talent to get into the business. But we also work with organizations, staff networks, such as at Lloyd's, their Asian network, where we created a FX training week. And 80% of the candidates for the FX training week with that staff employer network came for Generation Success. 80% were BAME. There are ways that you can do things differently that doesn't have to have a overarching sign-off, but you can utilize your best resource, that is your staff. And a lot of organizations say, well, how can we reach more diverse talent? Start with your staff. Your staff are your biggest advocates. But yeah, there's so much we can do, but it just takes open your mind and being proactive. And from what I've seen in the surveys, you guys are just that. You're passionate about making change happen. I'm sure we can all come together to do something.
One of the topics that people talked about, though, was representation, right? In terms of the HR teams, and my experience is the teams are quite white, right?
Mm-hmm.
That, I mean, that might be out of date, but there's a lot of white faces, not obviously not exclusively, and so that's something to look at also. If a little bit, Femi, I was shocked when you said you joined UEL, which is an incredibly diverse institution, right, in terms of the student body. And I think you said you were the first Black member of the career service, right? Even or kind of one of very few. And so, like, what message is that even sending? Like, so I think that's definitely looking at the makeup of the staff teams, like, and thinking, okay, how come we're not recruiting people of color into our teams? That's one thing. And then how do we? And I remember doing some work for an engineering client, and the brief wasn't about Black students, but it was about the socioeconomic side. I remember setting this thing up, and we had a couple of ambassadors, and we said, okay, can we get a bunch of, this is for engineers that are hard to reach people, can we get a bunch of engineers in the room? We didn't even know who they were because we didn't put any minimum criteria in. We turn up, there's 30 people in the room. I think maybe 25 are Black, and the clients come in and they're like, kind of like, we've never been in a room like this with most of the graduate engineers being Black. Like, how did you do it? It's like, well, we didn't do anything. We just asked the graduates to get a bunch of people together who are looking for work, who are engineers. And by the end of the short session, like, the employer wants to hire 4 of them. They're like, this is like, so there's no shortage of appetite. Coming into contact with graduates in a different context where the academic piece is put to one side, and we just get to see, okay, how are you actually working? And I think this is one of the challenges. I remember, Google did this huge study looking at if you went to an Ivy League university, is that critical? If you got an MBA, is that critical? And there's something about entry-level talent. It's very hard to predict how someone's going to perform, right? So we're all spending all this time and energy trying to predict performance, and it's very, very hard when you haven't got a track record in the work. So one of my kind of big things is, how do we get people doing real work without prejudging how they're going to do on it? That's where an internship could be great, or project work is great. We just go, great, go and do some. Like, and I'm going to let go of any judgment. I might have a private kind of, but I've been wrong so many times. I've worked with thousands of graduates, thinking, noticing an initial reaction of, you don't seem to be switched on, you don't seem to be very focused, you don't seem to be that into it. Put the project, do some project work. They're coming up with amazing ideas. They're completing stuff on time. That like, okay, the results of their work is speaking for themselves, right? And that's what I want to judge. I want great people in my organization. I want to help organizations recruit great people, but I'm going to do it based on the results of the work. There's just a name like that entry-level piece, whether it's coming from school, university, FE, whatever it might be. It's hard to make those predictions, and so maybe we can all be a bit humbler that maybe there's more great people that are out there that we're missing, that we need to be apparently taking risks, as you say, for me, but it's much less risky than maybe people think.
I really agree. It's so much less risky. So if we look at organizations as they are now, where people are saying they're not very, some organizations are not very diverse, they're not able to take diverse candidates at entry level. So basically, if we look at the performance of those organizations, they should all be working at 100%. Nothing should ever go wrong. They should never have any problems. Everything should be perfect, because actually they've got the pool of candidates they want. But we all know that they still have problems around absenteeism. They still have people making mistakes. And if we look at it from recruitment terms, all these people must be white. So if white people are allowed to make mistakes and do underperform, why is it you want to set up a system that attracts black people that are perfect? It's not going to happen. There'll be black people that underperform. There'll be black people that turn up late. There'll be black people that do naughty things in their organizations. And having spoken to HR, I know there's a whole heap of white people doing naughty things in organizations at this point in time. Therefore, we should already know that the system that we're using does not create perfect organizations. And if you're prepared to take this risk with certain types of people and deal with the consequences through HR, why is it so difficult to do it with others? So basically, is it really a risk? You still have the same measures in place. So you take somebody on, you have a probation period, and you have all those checks and balances to make sure that once you've recruited somebody, if it's not going so well, you can do something about it. So where's the risk? And as I say, why isn't every company performing so well with all these wonderful people that they've got?
It's so true. And we had the head of the Cantor Inclusion Index speaking at our conference last night, and she gave a stat based on the Inclusion Index that said 50% of staff feel that their company are not doing enough when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And the reason why that statistic is so important is when you look at the organizations who have done the best in transitioning to remote working during COVID, they were the ones that listened to their staff, the millennial staff, about the need for remote working, about flexible working policies. So once again, this is an opportunity for companies to listen to their staff around doing more.
So we're beginning to talk about another aspect, which is big, maybe outside our remit, but again, just to name, is like, once you've recruited people, what is the path of progression? Right? And I remember having a conversation with a very large organization. They were looking at their stats about how different ethnicities were getting rated. And they said, look, there's something going on that black people, seem to be performing worse. Like that's the view that's coming out of these performance reviews. And it's not really because they're performing worse, but some things, and we can talk about unconscious bias, and that's, an area that last few years I've done a lot of working with the organization called the Neuro Leadership Institute, just really understanding, okay, the depth of that, and critically, not just that it exists, because that's really not very helpful, but what to then do about it, right? Because there needs to be mitigation. But that can, if people aren't progressing through the organization, that gets felt, I'm going to say, at an energetic level, let alone kind of where are the leaders? And too many organizations we know don't have senior leadership that is Black and female, we know also. But so yeah, Stephen, how are we doing on questions or any other kind of directions of travel?
You've got a mountain of questions. Some of them you've been covering as we've been going along, and it's that I've been trying to keep track of them. I think there's a couple of areas that there've been quite a few questions on that we could do with exploring a bit more. We've got quarter of an hour left. One of those is HE. I agree with the point you made. We should have been in our ISE conference in Brighton last week, and if we look around that conference hall, it would be a sea of majority white faces. And I think exactly the same if we were at the ADCAS conference. So I think there's a lot we can do very much at looking at ourselves as an industry. A lot of the questions have been about HE, because we've talked a lot about employers, but actually what can HE do? And there have been questions around, is it okay for us to say to Black students, we know that because you're Black, you are going to face these experiences. Do Black students want to be identified in that way? And is it something that we should start this conversation happening much earlier in the pipeline? So I don't know if there's any comments you want to make on the education side of it, and then I've got a bit more on the employer side of it afterwards.
Definitely. But I was just going to say, race is such a hard conversation to have in the UK. It's so fun. It's interesting. I've heard experiences where institutions have tried to do a Black only kind of project, not a program to support Black students to get into the professions, but have done it in such a wrong way that they have upset the Black students. It's important to talk about it, about the barriers that students will face. It is important because actually this part of this webinar here is starting to make us feel comfortable as a society to talk about race. So yes, HE colleges, please do talk to students about the barriers that they will face, but then do not make them feel like they're being put on a special project or on a special pedestal because of the fact that they're Black. Because it is such a fine balance to say, yes, you are talented, yes, you may face barriers. We're not doing this because you need additional help. You have to make sure you frame it in the right way.
Having run some of these programs, I think the approach is really important. And I think it is difficult for institutions because sometimes if they do a program just for BAME or Black students, white students get upset about the fact that they're not going to get opportunities. But then that's kind of like a risk that institutions have to take, and they have to have the appropriate narrative to talk about, like the statistics, for example, to be able to say to white students, the reason we're doing this is because of, only 19% of you will be excluded, whereas 43% of Black students are going to, be excluded. So you need to have the right narrative to be able to defend yourself when you're going to be doing some of these things. And also, Black is a continuum for people. How one person feels about being Black and another person feels about being Black can be totally different. So some Black students will say, oh, I don't want to, I don't want to engage with that. But then there will be other students who do. And I think a lot of the time it's how you express this and who's the messenger. And I think that you have to have the right messenger, and that's why sometimes having the right type of having staff with backgrounds who understand the students. So, for example, knowing the way, Darius mentioned that some of the HR teams may be, for whatever reasons, very white. But then we've got to look at who is studying HR management and why this program may not be attractive to BAME students. And if it's not, why isn't it? And who's having a conversation with them about the careers that are open to them? A lot of BAME graduates or Black graduates do very traditional programs. They'll do law, they'll do medicine or try for medicine, dentistry. If things are going really badly, they want to be vets. But, they do these really traditional courses. And I've spent quite a bit of time talking to Black parents about the jobs out there, and I say to them, the jobs that your children will have access are in sectors you've never considered, and the jobs probably don't even exist at this point in time. So people need to have their minds open as well. And when universities are trying to attract students onto their courses, they need to think about how they attract BAME students into the non-traditional in terms of their communities, professions, so that we can have better representation in these areas. So I think you need to think about, universities need to think about how they send messages to Black students, how they, if they are running programs, how they make these seem like a positive step for Black students to engage in, and also having employers very much involved probably with those programs, so that students can see a kind of positive outcome, I think would be important.
Definitely. Femi said it really well. What I was trying to say, Femi did fantastically. And it is about the narrative, the approach. And the example I gave, it wasn't the careers team who did that program, it was actually the course leader. And it was well-meaning. They came from a well-meaning place. And we need to encourage more staff, more careers officers to do programs like this. But do try to get some like external professionals to come and help you out, so to make sure that you can get the messaging right. And as Femi said, do include employers, so that it's not just we're just going to mentor you, but actually give some inspiration by showing actually through this program we're going to give you this access to opportunities, and that will help with the attraction piece and engagement piece as well.
One of the things I'm surprised, well, not surprised actually, but by the questions is how many actual employers who are on here have said, right, tell us what we need to do more. And I think, for somebody like me who's always worked in large corporates with big teams who are nowhere near perfect, believe me, but actually have got resources to deploy. I think there are a lot of smaller graduate teams out there who want to do something, but actually really, struggle in a sense because they haven't got somebody who can spend, half their working time working on diversity initiatives. So what are the real nuts and bolts of what employers should be doing out there amongst students being on campus that will really make a difference?
I think if you're a small organisation, and I think this is where universities can help, is to look at the smaller SMEs in their locality and what they can do to support those SMEs and introduce Black students to them. Because during the last recession, 2008, the government gave money to universities to go and just recruit from organisations who had 50 employees or less. And I think that was a challenge, but I think it really opened SMEs up to different talent, because they'd often recruited through family members and those kind of family networks. They hadn't actually had contact with higher education, and they definitely hadn't come across Black graduates. And I remember a Black graduate going to work at a small recycling, a company that recycled furniture in the East End. And they were so delighted to have this. They'd never met anybody like her before. She was enthusiastic, she was different. And after they got paid to have her in for 2 months, and they kept her afterwards. But they would never have found somebody like that on their own. So I do think there's a role for universities to engage with their employer community, but not. I mean, a lot of universities think of the corporates, but I think you can do a lot with SMEs in your environment and giving them a totally different experience around having a person in their organisation who knows what Instagram is.
Definitely, and I'd like to add on that as well, because countless reports such as the non-educational barriers into elite professions did reflect that. They found that recruitment teams, small teams, just did not have enough bandwidth to reach out to the communities that they want to get into. Some solutions, I'll say, give me a call because we can help you out. We've done that with an investment bank, and they're now asking us to go to Ireland to do that for them. But it is definitely around that attraction piece. So a lot of small teams, a lot of organizations will try to utilize their brand as a way to attract candidates. And I saw in the surveys that some of those big brands were saying we're just not attracting being candidates. And that's because we live in a millennial generation. Your brand is massive, is a PLC, but to that millennial generation, you're not the brand that is in front of their faces like a Samsung or Amazon or all that type of stuff. So yeah, so talk to organizations like Generation Success, there's Bright Network, there's so many different organizations who have a wide access to the candidates you're trying to reach. You have a small team, but you can leverage other networks to definitely have an impact on your talent pool.
I think I would just double down on this. There's all sorts of government funding that got announced yesterday, right, around taking on people, and so take some risks, right? Hire some different kinds of people and get an experience. Like, we know that one of the things that's out there as an action is educate ourselves. Well, the best education is working with people who you wouldn't normally, right? You're going to learn so much through that. Every time I've been part of a recruitment process that people have hired people that they didn't really want to, but they were kind of, by that stage, they're like, I love these people. What they haven't got a 2-1, okay, all right. They didn't go to a great university, okay, right. Every time they turn out amazingly, right? And so I just really encourage you to broaden your horizons about what good looks like. And the way to do that is to find ways of working. And that could be, if it's been pre-hire, just kind of finding ways to get some project work for people to get some experience, because people are desperate for experience. So how can you set up to give people, project work that they can grow their experience on, you can get to know them. That's really low risk. Or find ways of having them in your organizations for 3 months, 6 months, and seeing what actually happens rather than trying to predict they're going to be good or they're going to be no good. So I think that's the biggest learning I've got, is letting go of all the judgments that I thought were really well formed about how good someone is, and just let them show me, set them up for success, and have a conversation about the results they're getting rather than what I think they're going to do.
And I would just like to say to organisations out there, whether they're universities or employers, the only way you're going to have more Black people is to hire more Black people. There's no way around it. You cannot change your demographic without actually employing a Black person. You can sit down around your conference tables, you can and ah, you can look at the statistics, you can feel sad about them, but I'm sorry, the only way forward is to hire a Black person. The same way I've been hired. I'm sure after I left the room, they had a big debate, because often I've been the only Black person around a senior management team. They thought, can we, can't we, shall we, shan't we? But in the end, the only way that things have changed is when somebody's hired me. They've taken that risk. They thought, she can't be that bad, we'll have her. And I think that's what you've got to do. And often, I'd like to say about myself, they've been pleasantly surprised. So you can't do it any other way. If you've got one Black person this year and you want to have 2 Black people next year, you've got to hire one more. And there's no way around it.
Definitely.
I think that, I'm just conscious of the time, I think that is a great way to end it. And I think that we've got to find a way to hire people differently. I've said this about so many, even my days as a recruiter, all these lovely programs that look nice on a CSR report, but if the people who get hired don't change, it's all a big fat waste of time. It's just noise. A last little, this is more, and I'm ready for this question. I think we're looking at a lot of the comments coming through. People are asking about how do we take this debate forward? How do we, because looking at the number of comments and the questions, the number of people who signed up, really rich conversation, people being very engaged, but a lot of people saying, how do we get something out of this? How do we get a conversation going that moves the dial, that changes things? Any thoughts on how we can do that, and how we can help the ISE and other organisations like us?
I honestly think we need to move. I mean, it's been great. Maybe this is like a great kind of opening. I think we need to move to dialogue, right? So maybe smaller groups. I'm certainly up for doing a smaller group one where we really have some back and forth, that we can workshop with people and really get into people's reality So we've talked, but I think to me that would be a next step of having a smaller group and a real dialogue rather than kind of conversation would be me.
For me, I think I just want people to take action. So I'd like a smaller group of employers and maybe some universities in there, and just say, it is July now. By spring of next year, we're going to do something. We would have come up with some practical actions so that by the end of 2021, if there's one Black person, there will at least be two. So I think that we need to sit down and talk to people about the practical things they can do, the different ways of looking at hiring, as Darius has come up with, the different ways that universities, if there was something different, how they could get the message out there, and on how also we can engage Black communities. But actually, I want to be part of something where we actually do something. We help employers do something really practical. So as I say, rather than just my son sitting on a chair, he's got somebody sitting next to him.
Definitely. And yeah, I echo what all the panelists have said. I've got a meeting with the business secretary on the 14th of July. And one of the things I'd love to get from this session is I'd love the ISE and your members to support us in signing a letter that we want to send to Boris Johnson around doing more around equality, especially now we're looking to recover during COVID. We've also created an equality pledge that we'd love employers to be part of and to sign, and to really move the dial forward, not just in terms of pledges, but in terms of actions. And of course, continue the dialogue. Let's continue the dialogue, and let's really, like in September, let's say we've got these commitments for the next 12 months, and we are going to really work and strive to make it happen. So I'd love to partner and have that dialogue and get you guys to sign and be part of this.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's it. And actually, to comments popping in, people saying yes, that's a great idea and people want to join that conversation and take this forward. So we'll pull some notes together from this that we'll put out. I think that's what we'll do. We'll think about a structure to get some smaller conversations going, workshop some ideas. We'll have to do it on Zoom, but we can find a way to do that most definitely. And let's start getting some concrete proposals out there. I can tell from the comments and the thank yous that there's a real appetite to do that. This has been a great conversation. Femi, James, Darius, really thank you for your time today, and also willing to be bold in some of these conversations, which has been really good. A few people have asked if they can get a recording of this webinar. You can. If you've registered for it, you'll get a link later on today that will take you to the recording, and you can share that recording with whoever you like, and as many people as possible. As I said, it's not behind our paywall. Thanks very much for being involved. Thanks again to our panelists. We'll give you a virtual round of applause. Unfortunately, we're not in a big conference hall to raise the roof, but I think you can take it as read that everybody's thought this is a really good session, and hopefully we'll all be talking to you all guys in a lot more detail over the coming weeks. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.